They say dogs are man's best friend, but sheepdogs, those wiry, wide-eyed, lightning-fast creatures that seem to read the land like a map and the flock like a living puzzle, are something else entirely, because they don't just follow commands, they anticipate them. They don't just chase sheep, they guide them, and they don't just work, they understand the mission, the terrain, the psychology of prey and predator, and the unspoken language between species that most humans will never even notice, let alone master. And if you've ever watched a border collie crouch low to the grass, eyes locked on a distant sheep, body coiled like a spring, waiting for the tiniest flick of a hand or whistle to explode into motion, then you've seen something ancient, something mythic, something that doesn't just belong to the farm. It belongs to the story of civilization itself. Because long before fences and tractors and GPS collars, long before the word domesticated even existed, humans were trying to survive in a world that didn't care if they lived or died. And in that world, the difference between thriving and starving often came down to one thing: whether your sheep stayed close or scattered into the hills. And that's where the sheepdog comes in, not as a pet, not as a tool, but as a partner, forged in the crucible of necessity, shaped by terrain, instinct, and the brutal clarity of survival. Because when you're living in Mesopotamia 10,000 years ago, and your entire livelihood depends on wool, milk, and meat, you don't have time for cute. You need precision, you need loyalty, and you need a creature that can read your mind before you speak. The earliest herding dogs weren't bred in labs or selected for Instagram likes. They were chosen by fire and famine, by the harsh reality of open fields and unpredictable flocks. And they didn't just learn to chase, they learned to think, to calculate, to move with purpose, and to adapt in real time to the chaos of nature. First came the livestock guardians, massive, stoic dogs like the Anatolian Shepherd and the Great Pyrenees, bred to live among the sheep, sleep beside them, and fight off predators with a calm ferocity that didn't need training, just trust. But then came the herders, the movers, the strategists, the dogs that didn't just protect the flock, they shaped it, sculpted it, turned it from a scattered mess into a flowing organism that could be guided across miles of open land with nothing but a whistle and a glance. And if that sounds like magic, it's because it is. Except it's real, and it's happening every day in fields across the world, where sheepdogs still work not because they're told to, but because they want to, because they understand the game, and because somewhere deep in their DNA, there's a memory of wolves, of wildness, of the hunt, and instead of chasing prey, they've learned to guide it. So when we talk about sheepdogs, we're not just talking about animals, we're talking about evolution, about partnership, about a living bridge between instinct and intelligence, and about a creature that has spent thousands of years learning not just how to move sheep, but how to move with us. And that's why today, we're diving deep, not just into the breeds and the training and the science, but into the story, the myth, the emotional truth of what it means to be a sheepdog, and why these dogs aren't just smart, they're sacred. And once you understand the ancient bond between humans and sheepdogs, once you see how necessity carved instinct into intelligence and loyalty into strategy, you start to realize that these dogs aren't just reacting to commands or chasing movement. They're solving problems in real time, reading terrain, predicting behavior, and executing complex maneuvers with a level of cognitive precision that rivals some of the most advanced artificial systems we've ever built. And the science backs it up in ways that are both staggering and humbling. Because when researchers at the Royal Veterinary College strapped GPS trackers to working sheepdogs and let them loose on open fields with scattered flocks, they didn't just see chaos or random movement. They saw patterns, algorithms, a living system of rules that the dogs seemed to follow instinctively, without training, without scripting, just pure embedded logic. And what they found was that sheepdogs operate using two core principles: collecting and driving. Collecting is the art of rounding up stragglers, of identifying the outliers and gently guiding them back into the group. not with brute force, but with presence, with positioning, with subtle pressure that nudges rather than commands. And once the group is tight, once the flock is unified, the dog switches to driving, guiding the entire mass toward a target, a gate, a pen, a destination, using angles and movement and anticipation in ways that look like choreography but are actually computation. And what's wild is that this behavior mirrors swarm intelligence, the same kind of decentralized decision-making we see in flocks of birds, schools of fish, and even drone swarms, where individual agents follow simple rules that lead to complex, coordinated outcomes. And the sheepdog, in this case, becomes both the conductor and the algorithm, shaping the flow without ever needing to dominate it. But it doesn't stop there, because in South Korea, researchers took it a step further, diving into the genetic roots of herding behavior by comparing the DNA of sheepdog breeds to non-herding dogs. And what they found was a set of genetic markers, specific sequences tied to impulse control, spatial awareness, and decision-making, that were significantly more active in breeds like Border Collies and Australian Shepherds, suggesting that herding isn't just learned, it's wired, it's baked into the brain at a molecular level. And when you combine that with MRI scans showing heightened activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, judgment, and emotional regulation, you start to see that these dogs aren't just fast or obedient, they're strategic thinkers, capable of adapting to new environments, solving novel problems, and even anticipating human intent before it's expressed. Which means that when a sheepdog crouches low and waits for your signal, it's not just listening, it's predicting, it's calculating, it's running simulations in its head about where the sheep will go, how the terrain will affect movement, and what you're likely to ask next. And that level of cognitive firepower isn't just impressive, it's revolutionary. Because in a world obsessed with artificial intelligence and machine learning, we've got living, breathing, tail-wagging examples of natural intelligence that outperform algorithms in real-world conditions. And they do it with no code, no batteries, no updates, just instinct, experience, and a bond with their human that's been forged over millennia. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that intelligence isn't just about data or speed or complexity. It's about adaptability, about emotional resonance, about the ability to read a situation and respond with precision and grace. And sheepdogs, in that sense, aren't just smart, they're wise. And once you've seen the intelligence in motion, once you've watched a sheepdog execute a maneuver that looks more like chess than chase, you start to wonder what kind of creature can do this so effortlessly, so consistently, and so joyfully. And that's when you realize that not all dogs are built the same, because herding breeds aren't just smart. They're engineered for precision, for endurance, and for a kind of emotional clarity that lets them read both sheep and humans with uncanny fluency. Take the Border Collie, for example, a dog so sharp it's been called the Einstein of the canine world. Not because it can do tricks or solve puzzles, but because it can manage chaos with grace, because it can take a scattered flock, a shifting landscape, and a silent handler, and turn that into a symphony of movement that feels more like telepathy than training. And what's wild is that this isn't just talent, it's architecture. Border Collies have a lean, athletic build designed for speed and stamina, with eyes that lock onto targets like lasers and a crouch that mimics the posture of a predator, not to intimidate, but to signal intent, to create pressure, to guide movement without contact. And that posture, that stare, that intensity, it's not learned, it's inherited, passed down through generations of dogs that lived and died by their ability to move sheep without breaking the flock. Then there's the Australian Shepherd, a dog that didn't actually come from Australia, but from the Basque region of Europe, refined in America for ranch work, and known for its boundless energy, its versatility, and its ability to switch between herding cattle, guarding property, and playing with kids without missing a beat. And what makes it special isn't just its agility, it's its emotional intelligence, its ability to read the room, to sense tension, and to respond with either action or affection, depending on what the moment demands. And if you want to talk about design, look at the Welsh Corgi, a dog so low to the ground it can nip at the heels of cattle without getting kicked, with a body built for weaving through legs and a bark that cuts through noise like a siren. And while it might look cute, it's a tactical machine, bred for precision, for courage, and for a kind of stubborn brilliance that makes it both a challenge and a joy to train. Or consider the Old English sheepdog, that shaggy, bear-like creature that looks more like a walking rug than a working dog, until you see it move, fast, fluid, and surprisingly light on its feet, with a coat that protects it from weather and predators, and a temperament that balances playfulness with grit. Because underneath all that fluff is a dog that was built to handle the toughest conditions with a smile and a sprint. And behind all these breeds, behind the fur and the eyes and the posture, is a genetic blueprint that's been shaped by centuries of selection, of trial and error, of choosing the dogs that could do the job and letting nature refine the rest. And today, thanks to advances in canine genomics, we're starting to understand that blueprint in ways that were impossible even a decade ago. In the UK, researchers working with the largest canine genome bank discovered a mutation in Shetland sheepdogs that causes a rare form of blindness, and instead of just diagnosing it, they developed a DNA test that allows breeders to screen for the mutation and eliminate it from future generations, which means that science isn't just observing sheepdogs, it's protecting them, preserving their legacy, and ensuring that the traits we value most, clarity, stamina, intelligence, aren't lost to chance. And it goes deeper, because genomic breeding values are now being used not just to select for physical traits, but to predict behavioral outcomes, to identify dogs that are more likely to succeed in herding trials, in therapy work, or in competitive obedience. And in some cases, those same genomic tools are being used to improve the sheep themselves, selecting for lamb survival, wool quality, and even methane output, which means that the sheepdog isn't just shaping the flock, it's shaping the future of agriculture. So when you look at a sheepdog, you're not just seeing a breed, you're seeing a lineage, a legacy, a living archive of decisions made by farmers, by scientists, and by nature itself. And every muscle, every glance, every instinct is the result of thousands of years of refinement, of purpose, and of partnership. And maybe that's why they feel so different. Why a sheepdog doesn't just look at you, it looks through you. Why it doesn't just respond to commands, it responds to context. And why training one isn't just about teaching, it's about unlocking something that's already there, something ancient, something sacred, something that's been waiting for the right moment, the right partner, and the right mission. And once you've seen the architecture, once you've understood the lineage and the logic and the legacy that lives inside every herding breed, the next question isn't whether they're capable, it's whether you're ready. Because training a sheepdog isn't about dominance or control or obedience in the traditional sense. It's about partnership, about clarity, about building a shared language that turns instinct into precision and chaos into choreography. And if you think it's just about shouting commands and throwing treats, you're already behind. Because the truth is, sheepdogs don't respond to noise. They respond to intent, to posture, to rhythm, to the emotional tone behind the signal. And if your energy is scattered, if your timing is off, if your commands are inconsistent or your body language is muddy, the dog won't just ignore you. It'll start making its own decisions. And while that might look impressive, it's a sign that the bond is fraying, that the partnership is slipping, and that the dog is working around you, not with you. So the first step isn't teaching the dog, it's teaching yourself, learning to move with purpose, to speak with clarity, to understand that every gesture, every whistle, every pause is part of a system, a code, a language that the dog is already fluent in, and your job isn't to invent it, it's to earn it. Start with the basics, not because they're easy, but because they're foundational. Sit, stay, recall, drop. Not as tricks, but as trust exercises, as proof that the dog is listening, that it's tuned in, that it's ready to follow your lead even when the stakes are low, because if it won't come when called in the backyard, It won't pivot under pressure in the field. Then layer in the herding cues, get back, away, come by, that'll do. Not as magic words, but as directional tools, as emotional signals that guide movement, shape flow, and create boundaries without force. And the key isn't volume or repetition. It's timing, it's consistency. It's the to pair sound with motion in a way that feels inevitable, not optional. Use positive reinforcement, not because it's trendy, but because it works. Treats, toys, praise, play, whatever lights the dog up, whatever makes the connection feel rewarding, and don't just reward obedience, reward initiative, reward problem-solving, reward the moments when the dog anticipates your intent and acts with precision, because that's not just training, that's evolution. Introduce livestock early but gently. Let the dog observe, sniff, circle, watch. Don't rush the chase, don't force the contact, don't turn instinct into anxiety, because the goal isn't excitement, it's control, and a dog that's too hyped, too reactive, too eager will scatter the flock instead of shaping it, and once that habit forms, it's hard to undo. Keep sessions short, 5 to 10 minutes at first, not because the dog can't handle more, but because focus is fragile and burnout is real, and the best training happens in bursts, in moments of clarity, not in marathons of repetition, and always end on a win, on a moment of success, of connection, of mutual understanding. Because that's what the dog will remember, and that's what will shape tomorrow's behavior. Build confidence, not just in the dog, but in the bond. Create situations where the dog feels safe, capable, trusted, especially in tight spaces, with stubborn animals, or on uneven terrain, because fear kills instinct, and hesitation breaks flow. And a sheepdog that doubts itself will start second-guessing everything. And that's when mistakes happen. And above all, learn the sheep. Because herding isn't just about the dog, it's about the flock. And sheep aren't stupid. They're reactive, they're sensitive, they're tuned into movement and pressure and rhythm, and if you don't understand their patterns, their triggers, their flow, then you're flying blind, and the dog will have to compensate for your ignorance, which isn't just unfair, it's unsustainable. So train with humility, with patience, with curiosity. Watch the dog, watch the sheep, watch yourself, and treat every session not as a test, but as a conversation, a chance to refine the language, to deepen the bond, to move one step closer to mastery. Because when it works, when the dog pivots and the sheep respond and the field becomes a canvas, it's not just beautiful, it's mythic. And that's the goal. Not just obedience, not just control, but flow, harmony, partnership, a living system where dog and human and flock move as one, guided by instinct, shaped by training, and powered by a bond that's older than agriculture, older than language, older than civilization itself. And once you've seen the training, once you've felt the bond and watched instinct become choreography, you start to realize that the sheepdog's power doesn't end at the edge of the field. Because what these dogs do, what they embody, isn't just useful for herding livestock, it's a blueprint for intelligence, for emotional clarity, for systems that adapt and respond and guide without force, and in a world that's increasingly chaotic, increasingly disconnected, increasingly automated, that kind of wisdom isn't just valuable, it's vital. Because today, sheepdogs aren't just working farms, they're working hearts, working minds, working systems that need guidance, not control, and you'll find them in places you'd never expect, doing jobs that go far beyond the flock, because their instincts, their emotional fluency, their ability to read movement and mood and intent make them perfect for roles that demand both precision and empathy. In search and rescue, for example, sheepdogs are being trained to navigate rubble, to locate survivors, to move through disaster zones with a kind of calm urgency that machines still struggle to replicate, because they don't just follow commands, they read the environment, they adapt to shifting conditions, and they make decisions in real time that save lives. And what's wild is that their herding instincts, those same rules of collecting and driving, translate perfectly to guiding people out of danger, to shaping movement in chaotic spaces, to turning panic into flow. And in therapy, in emotional support, in trauma recovery, sheepdogs are proving that intelligence isn't just about solving problems. It's about sensing pain, about responding to silence, about offering presence without pressure, and their ability to read human emotion, to adjust their behavior based on subtle cues, to offer comfort without intrusion, makes them ideal companions for people navigating grief, anxiety, PTSD, and isolation. Because they don't just sit beside you, they tune into you, they mirror your energy, they offer a kind of emotional stability that feels ancient, grounded, and real. But it doesn't stop there, because in competitive herding trials, in agility courses, in obedience championships, sheepdogs are showing the world what mastery looks like, not just in speed or accuracy, but in flow, in connection, in the kind of seamless partnership that turns a field into a stage and a routine into a story. And these events aren't just sport, they're celebration, they're proof that instinct and training and trust can create something transcendent, something that moves audiences not just with skill, but with soul. And in the world of technology, in robotics, in artificial intelligence, sheepdogs are becoming models, not just metaphors, but literal frameworks for how autonomous systems should behave, because their ability to guide without force, to adapt without panic, to manage groups with minimal input, is exactly what engineers are trying to replicate in drone swarms, in crowd control algorithms, in environmental cleanup bots that need to move debris or guide wildlife without causing harm, and the rules that sheepdogs follow, simple, elegant, effective, are being coded into machines that will one day shape cities, respond to disasters, and manage ecosystems. And maybe the most mind-blowing part is that while we're building machines to mimic sheepdogs, the dogs themselves are still evolving, still learning, still adapting to new roles, new environments, new challenges, and they're doing it not with updates or patches or firmware. They're doing it with experience, with intuition, with a kind of living intelligence that doesn't need to be programmed, just respected. So when you see a sheepdog sprint across a field, pivot on a dime, guide a flock through a narrow gate, or sit quietly beside a child who hasn't spoken in days, you're not just seeing a dog, you're seeing a system, a philosophy, a way of being that blends instinct and empathy and strategy into something that feels almost mythic. And in a world that's constantly chasing the next breakthrough, the next innovation, the next upgrade, maybe the real wisdom is already here, already running, already watching, already waiting. Because sheepdogs don't just move sheep, they move us. They remind us what guidance looks like, what partnership feels like, and what intelligence can become when it's rooted in trust, shaped by purpose, and delivered with grace. And after everything, the history, the science, the strategy, the training, the modern reinvention, you're left with a question that doesn't live in textbooks or trials or datasets, a question that sits deeper, quieter, more personal, and it's this. Why do we love them? Why do we feel something ancient and electric when a sheepdog locks eyes with us, when it moves with purpose, when it listens not just to our words, but to our silence? And maybe the answer isn't found in IQ scores or herding trials or genetic markers. Maybe it's found in the way they make us feel seen. Because sheepdogs don't just work. They witness, they tune in, they respond to the parts of us that are unspoken, uncertain, unfinished. And they do it without judgment, without hesitation, without needing anything in return, except the chance to keep moving, to keep guiding, to keep being useful in a world that often forgets how valuable quiet clarity can be. And maybe that's why they resonate so deeply. Because in a culture obsessed with noise and novelty and speed, sheepdogs remind us that mastery is quiet, that wisdom is patient, that leadership doesn't always bark or boast. Sometimes it crouches low, waits for the right moment, and moves with precision that feels more like art than instinct. They embody loyalty, not as a performance, but as a default setting, a way of being that doesn't need to be taught or rewarded, just honored. And when they work, when they guide, When they shape the flock or the moment or the mood, they do it with a kind of grace that makes you want to be better. Not louder, not faster, just clearer. And in that way, sheepdogs aren't just animals. They're archetypes. They're symbols of what it means to lead without ego, to serve without submission, to move through the world with purpose and presence and a kind of emotional fluency that most humans spend their whole lives trying to learn. Because they don't chase sheep for fun. They do it because they understand the mission, because they've been bred and trained and trusted to carry out a task that's older than language, older than borders, older than the idea of ownership itself. And when they do it well, when they move the flock with nothing but posture and pressure and patience, it's not just impressive, it's sacred. And maybe that's why we love them, not just for what they do, but for what they represent, for the reminder that intelligence isn't always loud, that strength isn't always forceful, that clarity isn't always complicated, and that sometimes the wisest creature in the room is the one that listens first, moves second, and never forgets the purpose behind the motion. So if you've ever felt lost, ever felt scattered, ever felt like the world was moving too fast and too loud and too far from center, watch a sheepdog work. Watch it read the land, read the flock, read the moment, and you'll see what clarity looks like, what purpose feels like, and what partnership can become when it's built on trust, not control. Because sheepdogs don't just herd, they heal, they guide, they teach, and they remind us that in a world full of noise, the quiet ones still matter, the patient ones still lead, and the ones who move with purpose still shape the future. So next time you see a sheepdog sprint across a field, don't just admire the speed. Admire the story, admire the legacy, admire the living intelligence that's been shaped by thousands of years of partnership, precision, and purpose. And if you want more stories like this, more wisdom, more clarity, more fire, subscribe, share, and stick around. Because here at Doggy Dog, we don't just talk about dogs, we decode legends.